In March of 1941, in a small wooden outbuilding behind a Victorian mansion in the English countryside, a 19-year-old woman is reading a sentence she does not understand. She has been at the typewriter for 6 hours. The room is cold. The single bare bulb above her head buzzes. The paper coming out of the carriage is full of Italian letters that, 20 minutes earlier, were meaningless gibberish, a wireless transmission intercepted from an Italian naval station somewhere in the Mediterranean. She has decrypted it. She has put it into Italian. And now she is reading what it says. It says, in Italian, "Today's the day -3. She does not know what that means. She does not know who is counting or what they are counting to. She knows only that, on the other side of the message, a man somewhere is preparing for something 3 days away. She walks the sheet of paper across a frozen lawn to the main house. A senior officer reads it. He does not know either. He files it. He tells her to keep watching. 2 nights later, a second message arrives. Today's the day -2. The next night, a third. Today's the day -1. The 19-year-old woman is Mavis Lillian Lever. She is from a row of houses in South London. Her father sorts post for the General Post Office. Her mother makes dresses on a sewing machine in the front room. And she has just helped uncover, 3 nights before it happens, the largest Italian fleet operation of the war. To understand how a postal worker's daughter ended up in that hut, you have to go back to a terraced house in Dulwich in the 1930s. Mavis Lever was born on the 5th of May, 1921. She was an only child. The house was small, the income was small, and the ambitions in that house were her mother's. Her mother had decided very early that Mavis would go to university, which, for a girl of that class in that decade, was not a small thing to decide. Mavis was good at languages. She had a particular ear for German. She read it for pleasure. She listened to German radio broadcasts on the family wireless in the evenings, because she liked the sound of the words. In 1939, she was 18 years old, and she was a student of German literature at University College London. She was reading Goethe in the original. She was writing essays on the Romantic poets. She was, by every plan she and her mother had made, going to be a teacher. And then, in September of that year, the war began. The German department of her university was suspended. Her professors disappeared into various ministries. And a polite, vague letter arrived from the Foreign Office. It said, more or less, that any young woman who knew German might be of use to the country. She volunteered. They put her, at first, in a room in central London, reading the personal advertisements in the daily newspapers. The theory was that German agents in Britain were using Lonely Hearts columns to send coded messages back to Berlin. Mavis was to read every personal ad in every paper, every morning, and flag anything suspicious. She read them for 3 months. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be: widows looking for companionship, soldiers' wives looking for word of their husbands, lonely men in cheap rooms in Bayswater. There were no spies. There was only, every morning, the catalogue of how many quietly broken people there were in wartime London. She went to her supervisor. She told him, with the directness that would mark her for the rest of her life, that she would like a more useful job. There was a war on. Reading The Lonely Hearts of Bayswater was not, she felt, helping to win it. Her supervisor looked at her. Then he looked at her file again. He saw the German. He sent her north. The train took her to a small station in Buckinghamshire. A driver met her with a car. The car turned off the main road, through a gate guarded by men in plain clothes, and up a long drive lined with cedars. At the top of the drive was a Victorian mansion. It was ugly. It was enormous. It was painted in the architectural taste of a man who had made money in Victorian shipping and wanted everyone to know it. It was called Bletchley Park. In April of 1940, Bletchley Park was the most secret installation in the British Empire. It was where the British government had quietly gathered the largest collection of mathematicians, linguists, chess players, crossword puzzle champions, and classicists in the country, and given them a single task: to break the German military's primary cipher machine, the Enigma. Mavis was not sent to the mansion itself. She was sent across the lawn to a small wooden outbuilding called, simply, the Cottage. The Cottage housed a section of about 10 people. The The section was assigned to Italian Naval Enigma. The section was run by a man named Dilly Knox. Dilly Knox was, by 1940, 56 years old, dying of cancer, and one of the strangest people in British intelligence. He was a classicist by training. He had read Greek at Cambridge. He had spent the First World War in a bathtub in the Admiralty, literally in a bathtub because he said he thought best in hot water, breaking the German naval cipher of that earlier war. He was eccentric. He was rude. He was widely considered to be the best codebreaker in Britain. He was also kind to the young women they kept sending him. Bletchley, in those years, ran on women. The men ran the cryptanalysis units. The women, most of them in their late teens and early 20s, did the painstaking statistical work that turned the men's theories into actual breaks. Dilly's section was almost entirely women. He called them, with no condescension that any of them ever recorded, his girls. He took Mavis on her first day into the cottage. He showed her a sheet of Italian gibberish. He told her, in his quiet and slightly distracted way, that the Italian Naval Enigma machine was similar to the German one, with subtle differences in the wiring. He told her that the Italian operators were not, on the whole, as disciplined as the German ones. They reused settings. They sent the same opening phrases. They were lazy. Laziness, Dilly told her, was the codebreaker's greatest friend. He taught her his technique. He called it lobsters and crabs. A private joke whose meaning was lost to most of the building, but what it really was depth cribbing. The patient exploitation of human habit. The trick of finding the same word or the same phrase in two different messages encrypted with the same key, and using the overlap to peel the whole thing open. She learned fast. By March of 1941, she had been at the cottage for 11 months. That was the month the -3 message came in. She and the other women in the cottage worked through the night. They worked through the second night, when the -2 came. They worked through the third, when the -1 arrived, and finally, in a sudden cluster, a chain of operational signals that told them what the count had been counting to. It was a fleet sortie. The Italian Royal Navy was putting to sea in force 3 heavy cruisers, Zara, Pola, and Fiume. The battleship Vittorio Veneto, a screen of destroyers. The target was British convoy traffic carrying troops and supplies from Egypt to Greece, where the British were trying to hold a line against the German advance through the Balkans. The decrypts went by secure line to the Admiralty. The Admiralty sent them to Alexandria. In Alexandria, the commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet was an admiral named Andrew Cunningham, then 58. Cunningham knew that the Italians had spies on the Alexandria waterfront watching his ships. He knew that if his fleet sailed openly, they would warn Rome, and the Italians would turn back. So on the afternoon before the sortie, he walked off his flagship in white shore clothes, carrying an overnight suitcase, and went to the golf club. He played, for the watching Italian eyes, a leisurely afternoon round. He had a long dinner, and then, in the dark, he doubled back to the harbor and went to sea. They met the Italians off Cape Matapan, the southern tip of Greece, on the 28th of March, 1941. The battle lasted into the night of the 29th. The Italian fleet, expecting an empty sea, was ambushed by a force that knew exactly where it would be. The Zara, the Pola, and the Fiume were sunk. 2 Italian destroyers went down with them. More than 2,000 Italian sailors were killed. Mavis Batey would, for the rest of her life, think about those 2,000 men. She had not seen them. She did not know their names. But she had read the operational signals that put them in the wrong stretch of water at the wrong hour of the night, and she had passed those signals up the line, and the line had done what lines do. She talked about it, decades later, in a voice that was steady but not ever comfortable. Admiral Cunningham, a few days after the battle, wrote a personal letter to Dilly Knox at Bletchley. The letter is in the archives now. It says, in part, "Tell Dilly that we have won a great victory in the Mediterranean, and that it is entirely due to him and his girls." In December of that same year, 1941, the month the Americans entered the war, Mavis broke a second enigma. It was a different machine. It was a cipher used by the Abwehr, the intelligence service of the German military. Until that December, no one in Britain had ever read an Abwehr message. Mavis worked through it with no crib. She used Dilly's technique, the lobsters and the crabs, the patient hunt for an Italian operator's laziness, applied this time to a German one. She found the laziness. She made the break. The break unlocked, very quickly, the entire German military intelligence service's wireless traffic about its own agents in Britain. It turned out that every German agent in Britain had already been captured. Every one of them had been turned. They were now sending false reports back to Berlin written by the British under British control. The system was called the double-cross system. And the Abwehr decrypts, the decrypts Mavis had opened the door to, told the British in real time whether the Germans were believing the lies. 3 years later, in June of 1944, those decrypts were what allowed the double-cross system to feed Hitler the lie that the main Allied invasion of Europe would come at Pas-de-Calais. Hitler believed it. He held an entire German army in reserve at the wrong end of the French coast while 150,000 Allied soldiers landed in Normandy. A line runs, very directly, from a 19-year-old in a cold hut in March of 1941 to the beaches of D-Day. She married Keith Batey, a fellow cryptanalyst from the Cottage, in 1942. They had 3 children after the war. Bletchley Park was kept secret for 30 years. Mavis never told her own children what she had done in the war. They knew she had worked somewhere for the government. They did not know what she had broken. They did not know about Cape Matapan. They did not know about the Abwehr. She did not tell them until the early 1970s, when the British government finally released The Secret of Ultra, and the books began to be written. By then, Mavis Batey had become something else entirely. She had become an internationally respected historian of English gardens. She had taken her post-war life and planted it in soil, researching the design and history of country estates, of formal hedges, of herbaceous borders. She wrote 7 books on the subject. She served as president of the Garden History Society. She was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire, not for the war work that was still partly classified, but for the gardens. She lived until the 12th of November, 2013. She was 92 years old. There is a bench now in the Memorial Gardens at Bletchley Park. It looks out across the lawn at the Cottage, the small wooden outbuilding where, in the spring of 1941, a 19-year-old read a sentence in Italian that began the count of 3 days. The intelligence she gathered is now declassified. Anyone can walk into the National Archives at Kew and read it. The papers themselves, the actual sheets that came out of her typewriter, are there in folders in the public reading room. The weight of what was on those papers, she carried alone, in silence, for 30 years, among her gardens. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.